Hello everyone, and welcome to another chapter from the Draco Veritas fanfic. So, I apologize that this is coming out so late. I had intended it to come out a few weeks earlier, and I thought that I had done the right thing, but turns out I did not. I had recorded a chapter and then I went to upload it, and then I looked and I realized my mistake. I had recorded the wrong chapter. And I was like, oh no, I didn't mean to do that. So it was very frustrating and very disheartening for a couple of days because I didn't know if I was going to have the energy in order to record the right chapter. And that's because, again, these chapters are so long now, and like recording them takes so much time, and editing them takes so much time. Like altogether, it takes about 4 hours to do this now. Which is a lot of time, for me at least, with all the other projects I have going on. But I rallied, I have come back, I've rebounded, and I'm able to now put this out. So, here I am with the correct chapter this time. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoy it. All trigger warnings apply, because, again, it's just getting darker, folks. So, if you're not a fan of anything that's too terribly serious, gotta sit this fic out, I'm sorry. Anyway, without any further ado, let's just get into it. Chapter 9. The Night, Death, and the Devil. I'm telling you, they aren't working! Hermione practically yelled at the harried-looking man behind the desk at the leaky cauldron. I've tried 3 times to reach Malfoy Manor, and I can't. There must be something wrong with your fireplaces. Do something! Get a chimney sweep! The desk clerk looked amused. One with an enormous broom, I suppose. Don't you try to be clever with me, Hermione snapped, so forcefully that he quailed before her. Look, miss, he said, there's nothing wrong with our fireplaces. If you're experiencing an issue, then there must be something wrong with the remote fireplaces at the manor. Someone there must be blocking all flue connections. But why would they do that? The clerk shrugged. I really couldn't tell you. Well, what can I do? Hermione wailed. I have to reach the manor, and it'll take forever to get an owl due to the holiday blockages. The clerk looked as if he obviously regarded this as somebody else's problem. Can't you apparate wherever you're going? No, there are anti-apparition charms on the house. Well, why don't you fly then? I haven't got a broomstick. Hermione suddenly narrowed her eyes at him. Do you have a broomstick I could borrow? The clerk appeared to waver. You do, don't you? Perhaps, said the clerk, but give me one good reason why I should let you have it. Because if you don't, Hermione added in a dark tone, I'll tell the manager you drill holes in the doors so you can watch people getting dressed in their rooms. His eyes popped. You wouldn't? I would. He glared at her. You must be a Slytherin, he said. Hermione smiled. I'm not, she said, but thanks for saying so. Someone cried out. A champagne glass dropped and shattered on the floor. Otherwise, the room was deathly silent. Harry would have expected himself to be more shocked, but instead he felt a weary sense of inevitability. He had known Lucius was alive. Everyone else must have thought they were looking at a ghost of a man dead for 6 months. Sirius had stopped dead and was white-faced with shock, and Lupin came forward to grasp his arm. Harry felt as if his thoughts were being strained through several layers of cheesecloth. Perhaps it was the result of too many shocks, one right after the other. He watched with disconnected horror as Lucius leisurely made his way into the room. He was not alone, either. At least 10 Death Eaters in their signature black and hooded robes were with him. 2 of them had their hoods down, and Harry recognized them as the mayor and the bailiff of Malfoy Park. The occupants of the room backed away as Lucius and his entourage passed by them. Harry could not blame them. The Death Eaters were terrifying, even at the worst of times. There was a raised dais at one end of the hall, surrounded by a gold railing. Lucius reached it and mounted the steps, then turned to face the crowded hall with the mayor and the bailiff at his side. The rest of the Death Eaters had broken away and spread themselves out against the wall. Lucius leaned against the railing and smiled. He was impeccably dressed. Elegant black suit, black cloak, expensive shoes, hands ringed with silver. His great eyes roamed over the crowd, appraising them as he might have appraised the quality of a painting. "To quote a Muggle writer," he said, "rumors of my death have been greatly exaggerated." Pansy made a choked little sound in her throat. It could have been a giggle or a sob. Draco stared grimly at his father. His eyes were unreadable. Harry wanted to lay a hand on Draco's shoulder in that moment, but he didn't dare. It seemed unwise to do that sort of thing in front of Lucius. Not that Lucius didn't know that they were friends, but still. "I'm sure very few of you are delighted to hear that I am alive," Lucius continued, "and have returned home, as my son knew I would. Didn't you, Draco?" Harry's eyes flicked to the other boy, who had gone a chalky sort of color. Lucius smiled, bright and malevolent. "Stupid little boy," he said, reading the look in his son's eyes. "Did you never realize that we knew you could see us? Did you truly think you could spy on the Dark Lord without his knowledge?" Draco said nothing at all. For once it seemed he had nothing to say. His shoulders slumped, and looked as devastated as Harry had ever seen him look. It was, in fact, Ron who broke the silence. He whirled, not on Lucius, but on Draco, and glared at him accusingly. "You knew," he said. "You knew your father was alive and you didn't tell anyone?" A sudden spurt of white-hot rage caused Harry to face Ron in a fury. "I knew too," he spat. "He told me. If you're going to blame Draco, blame me as well." Ron flinched and stepped back. As if Harry's sudden announcement had freed his voice, Draco spoke. "Dumbledore told me not to tell anyone," he said. Harry turned his head and found that Draco was looking over at Sirius. "I'm sorry." "Dumbledore is the one who should be sorry," Lucius said. "The senile old fool, making his clever little plans, thinking he could head us off, and you believing all our lies." "Was it all lies?" Draco said, and for a moment Harry thought a flash of what looked like hope crossed his friend's face. Lucius looked at his son. His grey eyes gave nothing away. "Well," he said, "perhaps not all of it." "That's enough." It was Sirius, who had detached himself from the rest of the crowd and stepped forward. "There's no need for these cat-and-mouse games, Lucius. You're an escaped mental patient. They'll bring you back to St. Mungo's before you can even—" "I'd rather think not," Lucius interrupted. "It is, in fact, all of you who are in violation of the law." Sirius whitened. "What do you mean by that?" "I, not you, am the master of Malfoy Manor," Lucius said, looking coldly at Sirius. "The laws of the manor are old, and the manor knows its master." "Potter." The word echoed so forcefully in Harry's head that for a moment he thought Draco had shouted it out loud. "Potter, get behind me, quickly." "What?" Harry half turned and stared at the other boy, whose chalky color had returned. "Why?" "The manor, it's charmed against trespassers, and the master of the manor has ultimate control over the charms. If my father decides we're all trespassing, he could hurl us out of here without lifting a hand. The charms won't work on me because—" "I know, Malfoy blood," Harry replied, backing up slightly. "You guys really need a new security system. Maybe one that isn't, dare I say it, blood-based." Draco looked fleetingly amused. "Pure blood pride," he said. "You wouldn't understand it." Sirius had folded his arms and was glaring. The rest of the wedding party was massed behind him, staring in confusion. "Say your piece then, Lucius," he snapped. "What do you want?" Lucius leaned thoughtfully on the railing. For a moment, Harry was reminded of Draco. The same insolent grace, the same cat-like movements that were somehow menacing. "I want you all," he said slowly, "who are not my family or my servants, to get the hell out of this house. There will be no wedding because I say so. Now, get out, all of you." "I will not leave Draco here alone with you," Sirius protested hotly. "He comes with us." "You won't need to leave him here alone," replied Lucius, in a voice like silk. "He'll have Harry for company." Harry blinked. Surely he heard wrong. He glanced sideways towards Draco, who was staring intently at Lucius. "Leave Harry out of this, father," he said, his voice firm. "Please refrain from being presumptuous," said Lucius. "Harry stays here." Sirius was tugging at his tie, livid with rage. "You honestly think you can keep him here with you?" He sputtered at Lucius. "The Ministry has no choice in the matter," Lucius said. "Draco is my son by blood, and this is his home. And Harry—" Lucius's eyes brushed briefly over Harry. They were icy cold. "Harry is my property." Sirius gave a furious bark of laughter. "You really do belong back in St. Mungo's." "Oh, I assure you I am quite sane," Lucius smiled. "And I have the law on my side. Harry Potter has been a domiciled resident of this house for 6 months today." He turned to the pale man at his side, who Harry knew as the bailiff of Malfoy Park. "Mr. Stebbins, if you would be so kind." With a curt nod, the bailiff unrolled a long strip of parchment and began to read aloud. "Under wizarding law, a domicile is a place where a person has his true, fixed, permanent home and principal establishment, and to which, whenever he is absent, he has the intention of returning. We are also in possession of a letter from Mr. Dursley, in which he states that he was advised that his guardianship of Mr. Potter had ended on Mr. Potter's 17th birthday. I believe he ended the letter with, quote, Good riddance, and never come near me or my family again. End quote. Therefore, Mr. Potter is now considered legally domiciled at Malfoy Manor per wizarding law and updated postage. That's ridiculous! Arthur Weasley burst out, stepping forward to stand next to Sirius. Do you deny, then, Stebbins interrupted, that Mr. Potter changed his address records to indicate that he is a resident of Malfoy Park? Of course we don't, Sirius said in a barely audible voice. The bailiff smiled a thin smile. Lucius Malfoy is now deemed by this court the guardian of his son by blood, Draco Malfoy, as well as Mr. Harry Potter, as his period of residence, and thus his domicile at Malfoy Manor, predates the date on which he turned 17. Signed by Lucius Malfoy and 6 officers of the Ministry, as well as the bailiff of Malfoy Park, in this, the year 1997. That is all, he finished, rolling up the parchment. 6 officers of the Ministry? Which 6 officers of the Ministry? Sirius demanded. Harry had never seen him look so angry, not even on his wanted posters. I'm so sorry, Lucius replied brightly. That's confidential. Sirius lunged at him, but Lupin and Mr. Weasley each caught at his arms and held him back. Sirius, Harry heard him whisper. The Ministry will take care of this. Don't panic. We can handle this. Sirius didn't seem comforted by this, and Harry hardly blamed him. The Ministry is obviously in on this, he hissed back. How can you not realize that, Arthur? Mr. Malfoy. It was Lupin speaking, his voice firm and collected. You may be correct, and may be able to keep Harry here for a certain amount of time, although you'd be a fool to think you could make it permanent, and I don't think you're a fool. However, that doesn't change the fact that any harm that comes to him while he's in your house is your responsibility. If you hurt him, if you harm either boy in any way, it's still murder, and you'll go to Azkaban. Lucius sighed and waved a heavily ringed hand in a dismissive gesture. I've no intention of harming the boys, he said. What one-track minds you all have. We will be watching you, Arthur Weasley shouted unexpectedly. Lucius snorted. Tedious little bureaucrat, he said. I've taken care of you, anyway. Rage and roar all you like. Everything I've done here is perfectly legal. And now, I'd like you all to leave me alone, please. Lucius raised his wand, and Harry felt Draco catch involuntarily at his sleeve and pull him back, hard. There was a roaring in his ears, and he ducked his head. Lucius shouted an incantation Harry could barely hear, and something like a powerful wind tore past him, ripping at his clothes and hair. He remembered the whirlwind spell he had cast that had hurled Lucius out of the manor, wondered if this was the same thing. How ironic it would be if it was. He held his breath, and it was over. The wind stilled and was gone. Draco released his grip on Harry's sleeve, and he opened his eyes. The room was nearly empty. Lucius still stood where he had been, untouched by the storm, the smirk on his narrow face making him look far more like his son than Harry had ever seen him. The Death Eaters were still there as well, standing near Lucius. All that remained of those who had been at the party before Lucius had arrived were his entourage, Draco, himself, and Ron. Lucius looked at the boys with an expression of calm interest. Then he snapped his fingers, and the Death Eaters began to walk towards them. Draco cleared his throat. "I didn't realize you decided Weasley was your property as well," he said, and jerked his chin towards Ron, who made a choked little sound in his throat. Without any change in expression, Lucius stepped down from the platform, took a few steps towards his son, and hit him hard across the face. "Be quiet," he snapped, "and do not speak on subjects you know nothing about." Draco put his hand to his face, and Harry saw the mark there, already beginning to bruise up, the rings having cut into his cheek. "You're not allowed to hurt him," Harry protested fiercely. "You said that you knew that." "Surely a father can reprimand his son," Lucius said calmly, not looking at Harry. Then he raised his head and looked at his Death Eaters. "Take them," he said, gesturing at Harry and Draco. "Lock them up on the North Tower. No, not him," he added, and laid a long-fingered hand on Ron's sleeve. "Leave this one here with me." Harry heard Ron's sharp intake of breath, and even now, even after everything that had happened, he felt it like a blow to his stomach. He spun around towards Ron, but the mayor had already seized him and jerked his right arm up behind his back. The pain was immediate and intense, and Harry cried out and kicked backwards with his feet. His left foot connected satisfyingly with something soft and fleshy, and the mayor nearly dropped him. "Stop that," he heard Lucius say sharply, and tapped Harry with his wand. Instantly, Harry's muscles froze, as if he'd been encased in ice. He couldn't even turn his head to look at Ron, or at Draco. Behind him, the mayor chuckled low in his throat. Then he took hold of Harry once again, and began to drag him out of the hall. Ginny had been just as shocked as everyone else when Lucius entered the room. He was dead. This couldn't be happening. But then she had looked across the room and saw Draco's face, and she knew. He must have known all the time that his father was alive, and lying in wait for the opportune moment to return. The betrayal felt like a punch to the gut, but then she heard Draco's voice, soft and stilted from across the room, telling Sirius that Dumbledore had made him promise not to tell. It spurned something inside her, and as the bailiff began to read out an insane list of reasons why Harry would be kept at the manor, she chose that moment to inch slowly away from the crowd and into a more secluded corner of the room. Something was going to happen. Something terrible. She could feel it coming on like a tidal wave. The gold chain around her throat gleamed brightly, and slowly she reached a hand up to draw it out from under her dress. Grateful that she had brought it with her, and even more grateful that she always kept it set to an hour before. She waited until it looked as if Lucius was going to cast some sort of spell, something that would hurl them all away from the manor, somewhere no one could be of use to either Harry or Draco. Then she took a deep breath and quickly flipped over the time-turner, and the world disappeared. When everything settled around her again, Ginny found herself still standing in the room the Malfoys had called the Greater Hall. It was less crowded now, and she wasted no time in cutting diagonally across the room, then headed for a small door on the west side of the hall and ducked through it quickly. She was in a stairwell. A narrow staircase led upwards, and there were bracketed torches on the walls on either side of a square mirror. Ginny glanced into it, seeing her own face very pale between her yellow cloak and curling red hair. She looked frightened, but determined. Then she began to climb the stairs. Finally, she found herself in a long, wood-paneled hallway that ran the length of the house's facade. Just outside the window, she could see the stone balcony that looked out over the gardens. Right now it was piled with snow, the diamond-paned windows fastened shut against the cold. Just down the hall was a doorway she remembered when she'd been at the manor before. They'd spent most of their time in that room. She went to the door now and pushed it open and stepped through it into the library. It looked just the same with its blue and green glass in the windows, the same high shelves full of books. It was quiet in here, so quiet that she could hear the beat of her own heart over the soft ticking of the gold clock on the north wall. Ginny took a deep breath and prayed that her presence in this room would go undetected by the enchantments the manor could use to eject her. Now there was nothing left to do but to wait and watch. The day was beginning to wane, the shadows lengthening in each room, and the girl in her golden cage looked up, bright-eyed. "Someone is coming," she said. "Who is it?" asked Rookwood, raising his head. "It is Lucius," said the girl, "and he has someone with him." "I will let them in," the other said, and crossed the room, giving the gold cage and the girl inside it a wide berth. Near the cage, Voldemort stared at the chessboard and did not look up as Rookwood opened the brass double doors and stood back to let Lucius Malfoy pass into the room.
"Lucius," he said, "I hope, for your sake, that you bring me good news."
"The best news, my lord," said the pale man. "We have Harry Potter in our temporary custody. Arthur Weasley is out of power, and the transition at the ministry is going smoothly."
"Good,"
said Voldemort.
"I also see that you have brought me someone."
"Yes, master," Lucius said, and cleared his throat. "I have brought you the boy." At that, the Dark Lord rose to his feet and turned. The girl in the cage raised herself up on her knees and stared at Lucius, calm and composed, holding the arm of a tall boy with red hair, dressed in disheveled party clothes. The boy's face was very white. "Lucius," whispered the girl inside the cage, and reached a hand through the bars. "Lucius, look at me." Lucius ignored her, although the red-headed boy stared at her with wide eyes. Instead, he spoke to the boy. "Greet the Dark Lord," he said. The red-headed boy was silent. "Lucius," wailed the girl inside the cage. "You promised." When Lucius did not acknowledge her, the red-headed boy spoke. "I don't understand," he said. "Why am I here?" Voldemort looked at him, and a faint smile touched the edge of his inhuman mouth.
"You really do not know? You cannot guess?"
The boy shook his head.
"Well then,"
the Dark Lord came forward and laid a hand on the boy's shoulder, and he winced.
"Perhaps this is something we should discuss. Come over here with me to the table. Do you play chess?"
The moment Hermione landed the Nimbus 3000 in Malfoy Park, she knew something had gone terribly wrong. The town was utterly lightless. Every lamp and lantern was snuffed, every torch extinguished. All the shop windows were darkened, and the doors were bolted shut. The streets were quite deserted, and a cold wind whistled between empty-looking buildings. She propped her borrowed broomstick against the wall of the cold Christmas inn, and gazed around in perplexity. There should be carriages here, she thought, gazing around with deepening unease. There should be decorations, servants waiting to give directions. The cold Christmas inn should be open and bursting with light. Hermione! An unexpected voice jolted her out of her reverie. What are you doing here? Hermione spun around and stared. Standing on the steps of the cold Christmas inn was a familiar figure with a mop of bright hair. George! She exclaimed. What's happened? George stared at her. You mean you don't know? Hermione's heart skipped a beat. Don't know what? Come here. George caught her by the arm and steered her around to the side of the inn. George, you're scaring me. What's going on? What's going on? Lucius Malfoy's what's going on. What are you talking about? He showed up at the wedding, Hermione. Hermione felt her jaw sag. But he's dead. Yeah, George said briefly. Looks like he didn't get that memo. Are you sure it was Lucius you saw? George looked exasperated. No, maybe it was Draco's other tall, blonde Death Eater father. Hermione's hand flew to her mouth. Did he hurt anyone? No, George said slowly. Not exactly. Everyone was flung out of the manor, though, scattered for miles. We've just started regrouping. And you landed here? No. I landed in the middle of a group of carolers on Hampstead Heath. Gave them a right scare. Then I apparated back home, and everyone was there. Except Ron and Ginny, which is concerning. Anyway, Dad sent me here to look out for latecomers, to warn them off. George reached out a hand to her. We should head back to the Barrow. Charlie's there. He can explain better than I can. What about Harry and Draco? She asked, remaining motionless. Neither of them are dead, if that's what you mean. George's voice was flat. Just come with me, please. He held out his hand again, and this time she took it. The top of the tower was smooth and slightly tilted, as if it had been sheared off at an angle by a pair of giant scissors. It was surrounded by crenellated walls, just high enough to lean against while sitting down. Draco had climbed atop one of these walls and looked around thoughtfully. He was familiar enough with this tower from his childhood to know what he'd see. Sheer walls falling away to the ground, the gardens below like dark smudges against the snow, the distant road that led down to the lights of Malfoy Park. Are you sure you should stand up there? Asked Harry, who was hovering back by the bolted door in the tower wall. You could fall. I won't fall, Draco said. Well, come down anyway, Harry said. Draco shrugged and jumped down from the wall, landing lightly on the flagstones. The adamantine cuff around his left wrist banged against his side as he landed. I'm down now, Draco said, stating the obvious. Feel better? I'd feel better if you came over here and helped me try to open this door, Harry said. Draco shook his head. Don't bother, he said. It's enchanted. Harry stopped tugging at the door and turned to look at him. There was a rebellious set to his chin. I don't suppose you know how to get the locking spell off. It's not a locking spell. Exactly. The door is enchanted to open only from the outside. And no, I don't think it's a reversible spell. All spells are reversible, Harry said. Well, you're welcome to knock yourself silly trying. I, for one, am going to sit here and try to think of a plan. Draco sat down, his back against the stone parapet, and a faint dizziness washed over him as he sat. He closed his eyes, willing it to pass. Even with his eyes shut, he could sense Harry as he sat down beside him. Are you all right? He heard Harry say. He opened his eyes. Yes. You look peaky. Draco tilted his head to the side and looked at Harry. He seemed a bit tired, but alert and burning with energy. Draco blinked. "What's eating you, Potter?" "Nothing," Harry said, and looked away, down at the frozen cathedral of the forest with its masonry of ice. "Well, the obvious, in that, once again, we're at the mercy of a deranged maniac with a plan to take over the world." Draco nodded absently. "If there's one thing my father's good at, it's cunning plans for world domination. I wouldn't worry too much, though. Sirius is out there, and he'll think of something to get us out of this." "Maybe," Harry replied, his voice soft and sounding even less sure than Draco felt. "I'm bored," the other boy said conversationally. "Isn't it odd how quickly stock terror turns to stock boredom? And hard to say which is preferable. I suppose we could spit down on passers-by," he suggested. "Although I don't think there are very many passers-by at the moment. Or we could sit in silence," Harry offered. "How's about we don't?" Draco said, looking intrigued. "And instead you tell me exactly how you're feeling about the whole Ron Pansy ordeal." "No," Harry replied shortly. "Well, that was a productive discussion," said Draco, with a broad and expansive wave of his arm. "I'm glad we talked." Harry opened his mouth to retort, but a sound unexpectedly interrupted him. Harry spun around to see Lucius Malfoy standing by the open tower door. "Pansy!" Hermione demanded, her voice raising even higher. "Pansy Parkinson!" "Well," Charlie said, "yes." "Are you sure? Are you totally sure?" Fred and George simultaneously inched their chairs away from Hermione. Charlie, however, bravely held his ground. "Yes, we're sure." Hermione made an indistinct sound of rage and banged her fist down on the table. The vase trembled. "I can't believe I had the chance to wring her twisted little neck yesterday, and I didn't even know. That hateful, horrible... Oh, when I get my hands on her, I'll throttle her until she turns blue." "You do that," said George. "Indeed," said Fred. "And if there's going to be a hair pulling, let us know." "Oh, shut up, Fred," said Hermione irritably. There was a short silence. "Anyone for tea?" Charlie inquired. "I don't want tea," said Hermione grumpily. "I know," Charlie said amiably, "but we're all out of bitter revenge, so it's either tea or nothing." "I'm hungry," George opined in a hopeful tone. "Good." Charlie bounced up from the table. "I'll make some food." "That's Charlie," observed Fred cheerily. "When in doubt, cook." Hermione, refusing to be cheered, continued to stare moodily at the table. "I really wish you hadn't told me," she said through her teeth. "Took your mind off Harry and Malfoy for a second, didn't it?" "Ow!" George said, breaking off as Fred punched him, none too subtly, in the arm. "What? She was worrying. And now she's worrying again," Fred snapped, waving an arm towards Hermione, as if she were a natural disaster for which George was ultimately responsible. George was spared answering by the opening of the kitchen door. Mr. and Mrs. Weasley came in, heavily bundled up in winter cloaks, flakes of snow melting in their hair. "Any word from Ron and Ginny?" Mrs. Weasley asked immediately, shedding her heavy cloak and dropping her gloves on the table. "No, Mum, nothing," said Charlie quietly. "But—" He pointed the metal cooking spoon he was holding at the kitchen clock. Both Ron and Ginny's hands stood firmly on traveling. "They're obviously fine. Ron knows how to apparate, and Ginny will find a way to get home, come hell or high water." I know. Oh, Hermione, love, I almost didn't see you." Hermione felt a brief flash of guilt as Mrs. Weasley hugged and kissed her, and Mr. Weasley proffered a fatherly handshake. She knew they'd rather she was Ginny or Ron, or even Harry, and was sure they were ill with worry, although they both hid it well. "Are you all right, dear?" Hermione nodded. "I'm fine," she said, and settled back quietly as the two elder Weasleys joined their offspring at the kitchen table. Soon enough, everyone was picking at Charlie's signature toad in the hole and not saying much. The conversation was enlivened somewhat when there was another knock at the door. This time it was Lupin and Sirius, having spent the past hour installing a semi-hysterical Narcissa at the home of a family friend who had promised that his house was so well warded and so unplottable that Lucius would never find it. They were both glad to see Hermione alive and well, although neither seemed interested in the toad in the hole. "How's everything at the guild, Remus?" Mr. Weasley asked, as Mrs. Weasley summoned chairs for the newcomers, and they squeezed in at the table between George and Charlie. Lupin shrugged. "Panicked. Moody's running around shredding files. He's convinced all his classified documents are about to be seized by minions of you-know-who. He's crushed that his plan to stop Lucius didn't come to anything." "Well, no one could have foreseen," Mrs. Weasley said softly. Lupin sighed. I know. But considering how foolish we all feel, I can only imagine how foolish the head of the guild must feel. How are things at the ministry, Arthur?" Mr. Weasley looked at his wife, then back at Lupin and Sirius. "Bad," he said gruffly. "Apparently I'm no longer minister. In fact, I'm not even allowed in the building." "What?" Fred dropped his fork. "Dad, you didn't tell us that." Sirius spoke quietly for the first time since coming inside the burrow. "Tell us what happened, Arthur." Mr. Weasley sighed. "Apparently some sort of irregularity with the votes that elected me was discovered by a few of the council members. So I'm out of office, pending investigation. And I'm not allowed in the ministry building, because my presence might compromise that investigation. They showed me out. It was humiliating." Sirius glanced at Lupin. "Death Eater meddling." Mr. Weasley nodded. "No doubt," he said. "The question is, what do we do now?" "I think Remus and I had better go by the ministry while we still can," Sirius said, "although I'm afraid that if I catch sight of Lucius Malfoy, I won't be able to restrain myself from wringing his scrawny neck." "All that stuff he said about Harry residing in Malfoy Manor, that wasn't true, was it?" George interrupted unexpectedly. "I mean, he's a convict. He was declared insane. How could he be allowed to walk about as a free man?" "Well, the Manor and Malfoy Park are something of a special case where legality is concerned," Lupin said. "That area is, in essence, like a small kingdom or medieval fiefdom, in that Lucius exerts a total control over everything that happens within its environs. It's very old, very familial kind of magic that has to do with blood ties to land and, specifically, localized kinds of charms. But of course, those kind of ancient laws are anachronism, not recognized by the ministry." "What ministry?" Arthur said bitterly. "Exactly," Lupin said. "Lucius has never bothered to attempt to implement most of the old laws of the manor, at least not since you-know-who was powerful, as the ministry would have certainly stopped him. Generations of Malfoys have pretended those laws didn't exist, and so they've remained, technically, off the books. And those laws, of course, don't recognize the outside jurisdiction of the ministry, so it hardly matters whether the council ever declared Lucius to be insane. They could have declared him legally a rodent, and it wouldn't matter. But going through personal mail, George said suddenly, that has to be illegal, right?
That would depend on how corrupt the ministry is, Hermione said suddenly. When he who must not be named was in power, he didn't obey any laws. It's quite possible the ministry would back Lucius up on this, if they've all been corrupted.
This pronouncement caused the rest of the table to fall silent, each lost in his or her own thoughts. Into the silence, Hermione glanced blindly at Mrs. Weasley.
Would it be all right if I went upstairs and lay down for a bit? I feel a little dizzy.
The older witch was all sympathy.
Of course. You can use Ginny's room. Thanks.
Hermione slipped away upstairs without glancing back. She knew perfectly well that everyone at the table was looking after her with concern, and was glad to get away. Draco rose to his feet. "Father," he said, sounding surprised and a little awkward. "I hadn't thought you'd come."
"Didn't you?"
Lucius inquired lazily.
"Thought I'd planned on leaving you up here forever."
"I figured you'd send minions," Draco said. He had put his composure back on like a cloak, after a moment of what had seemed like unguarded surprise. His grey eyes were half-lidded, his mouth curled into a narrow smile. Lucius took a step forward, and the tower door behind him remained propped open slightly, a maddening glimpse of freedom. "Get up," he said, and it took the sudden tensing of Draco's shoulders for Harry to realize that Lucius was, in fact, speaking to him. Slowly he got to his feet, but Draco put himself between his father and Harry. Harry wished that he wouldn't. He almost welcomed a chance for Lucius to strike at him. "What do you want, father?" Draco asked, his voice toneless.
"Only to give you news,"
Lucius replied lazily. His gaze narrowed until it seemed as sharp as a needle with which he jabbed at his son. Draco continued to stand very still between him and Harry, his face in shadow.
"Draco is dying."
Harry felt as if Lucius had walked up and hit him in the face, the words making no real sense, as if he had spoken them in another language. "What?" he said, hearing his own voice, clear and stiff, as if it were a stranger's.
"What did you say?" "I should think it was quite clear," said Lucius, who seemed almost manic with the pleasure of his own malice. "Draco is dying."
Harry looked quickly to Draco, but the other boy was as unmoving as he had been before Lucius had spoken. A still black silhouette against the silvery parapet wall. His chest rose and fell rapidly, but other than that, he was motionless. "Dying of what?" Harry demanded in a half-whisper. He wanted to speak more loudly, but he couldn't seem to get enough air. "Poison," Lucius said, as if this should be obvious. Draco raised his chin and looked at his father. The gesture lifted his face out of shadow. "It was the arrow," he said to Lucius, his voice calm and factual. "Wasn't it? There was some kind of poison on the shaft." "Aren't you clever?" Lucius said dryly. Harry knew Lucius wasn't lying, knew it from Lucius's dry gleefulness, from the dull knowledge in Draco's eyes, and even more than that, he knew it from his own memories. Draco stumbling over a fencing match, all his grace gone. Draco lounging against walls, leaning on bedposts while he talked, slouching lazily in chairs. Harry had put all this recent indolence down to half-insolent posturing. But it wasn't that, was it? "How long have I got, then?" Draco was saying, when Harry returned to the present.
"A month," Lucius said. "2 weeks, maybe, before you can't walk anymore."
A faint shudder passed over Draco. Harry saw his hands tighten at his sides and felt the shiver down in his own bones. Whatever had been blocking his throat dislodged itself as he spoke. "You poisoned him?" he whispered. "I never said I was the one who poisoned him," Lucius said. "I am merely presenting the facts, and they are these. He has been poisoned. The poison is a rare and subtle one. It will be a painful death, and not a particularly quick one. If he dies of this," Harry said in a flat, icy tone, "I'll kill you myself." "You will do no such thing," snapped Lucius. "I will be using a memory charm on you both shortly. You will not recollect anything I have told you. When Draco dies, it will be assumed to be a natural illness." "Then why tell us at all?" Draco asked. The moonlight silvered his eyes and made them opaque. "If there is no cure—"
"I never said there wasn't a cure,"
Lucius remarked. The air whistled in Harry's lungs as he sucked in a breath. "There's a cure? Then what—"
"Harry,"
Draco said in the same toneless voice.
"stop."
Harry subsided reluctantly. A cool smile ghosted across Lucius's narrow face as he looked from Draco to Harry and back again. Slowly, he flexed his fingers inside his gloves. He appeared to be doing complicated mental arithmetic that amused him greatly.
"I think," he said, "that I'd like to talk to Harry now, alone."
And he gestured towards the tower door.
"Come with me."
"I most certainly won't," Harry snarled. Lucius rolled his eyes.
"If you'd rather I call upon my colleagues to drag you, be my guest," he said. "I can't promise they'll be too terribly gentle. You are not popular among my acquaintances, Harry Potter."
Harry opened his mouth to protest again, but Draco cut him off before he could speak. "Harry," he said, "go." Harry snapped his mouth shut into a furious line and glared back at Lucius. Lucius's smile was positively incandescent. He swept an arm towards the tower door.
"After you, Mr. Potter."
Harry went, his feet dragging, feeling as if some part of himself, the sane, logical part, which expected the world and everything in it to make some sort of sense, had been severed and might never be reconnected. At the door of the tower, he turned and looked past Lucius, back at Draco, who was standing in the middle of the tower. He seemed etched in light, only his eyes meeting Harry's across the space that separated them, looked black. Later, when Harry tried to picture his friend, it was this image of Draco that would always come to his mind. Even though he tried to replace it with happier ones, the cold white figure, straight and slender, outlined against a frozen emptiness of bleached stone, was all that would come to mind.
"Checkmate!"
Voldemort said. Ron kept his eyes fixed on the half-empty chessboard. The board itself was made of onyx and travertine, the sides ornately carved with scenes of court life and battle. The pieces were hewn out of whole jewels, clear rubies and dark emeralds. The knights had solid gold eyes. The board and its pieces were probably worth half the borrow, maybe more than half. The Dark Lord sat back in his chair, and Ron heard the scratching of his nails against the piece he was holding, and shuddered. He had not looked up to his opponent once during the entire game, but the brief flashes he'd caught of the white bone hands had been more than sufficient to throw him into a panic that felt akin to nausea.
"You let me win,"
Voldemort said. Ron wouldn't have thought that the fear could get any worse. Apparently, he'd been wrong. He gripped the pin that held his cloak together so tightly with his right hand that it cut into the soft flesh of his palm.
"I said," Voldemort repeated, "you let me win, didn't you, boy?"
Ron's voice came out in a whisper.
"I'm really just not all that good at chess,"
he said, and gathered together all his Gryffindor courage to raise his chin and meet the Dark Lord's gaze. Red eyes like coals stared back at him from a flat, snake-like face. Ron felt ill.
"I just don't see how I could be much of a challenge for you."
Voldemort's lipless mouth curled into a smile.
"Oh, but you are," he said. "But perhaps not in the way that you might think. I believe you can beat me, and what is important is that you try."
Ron couldn't believe it. Was Voldemort giving him a pep talk? The Dark Lord waved a hand at the chessboard. Instantly the pieces rearranged themselves, and the board was again ready for play.
"We shall play again, and this time, if I am not fully satisfied of the sincerity of your attempts, I shall remove all of the skin from your right hand. Slowly."
Ron swallowed hard.
"Shall we begin?"
Voldemort asked. The Ministry was, as Arthur had reported, in shambles. Low-level officials scuttled here and there looking terrified, and the once gracious-looking marble entry hall was filled with frantic wizards and witches rushing about, registering complaints and exchanging hurried anecdotes. Lupin looked wryly at Sirius.
"The memory charm squad must be out in full force today," he observed.
Sirius nodded. Typical Lucius, wanting to cause as much disorganization as possible.
"Look, there's young Percy Weasley over there."
Any hope they might have had that Percy would provide some assistance was dashed when they got within speaking distance of him. Looking harried to the point of torment, his red hair sticking out in all directions, and his normally immaculate robes crumpled, Percy greeted them with a distracted air of panic.
"Terrible things are going on,"
he hissed in a half-whisper, having consented to be dragged into a stairwell for a brief chat.
"My office has been transfigured into a broom closet."
"That is dreadful," Sirius agreed. "You must be distraught." Lupin fought the urge to kick him in the shin.
"I am distraught. It was a corner office. I had a view of the Thames." Percy tugged at his hair. "Now it's full of mops and Parkinson's perfect parquet polish."
"Can't you register a complaint?"
"Apparently it involves filling out several forms in triplicate, then sending them to the Department for the Investigation of Random Acts of Magic, which I happen to know was closed down last year for lack of funds." "Damn Malfoy!" Percy seethed. "I'll get him for this."
"You think Lucius Malfoy has something to do with this?"
"Him and his cronies. I'm telling you, the only Ministry officials who haven't had their offices transfigured into something nasty are the ones who've always been a little bit shady, if you get my meaning."
"I get your meaning," Sirius said. "You haven't got a subtle bone in your body. None of you Weasleys do, except perhaps Bill. Makes me wonder why your father wound up in the position of minister." Lupin spoke quietly.
"Any word on who might be replacing him?"
Percy glanced quickly up and down the deserted marble hallway before replying. The general procedure is that the head of the advisory council acts as temporary replacement if the minister is no longer able to perform his duties. The position of head of the council rotates monthly. Right now, it's Francis Parkinson. Percy finished grimly.
What a surprise.
Sirius's tone was flat. How much of the ministry would you say is now entirely under their control? Asked Lupin. Let me put it this way, Percy said in a chilling tone. Do whatever you have to do here, and then get out and don't come back. This location is now hopelessly compromised. It won't be safe much longer. Percy paused, and for a moment the officious tone left his voice. You have come from the Burrow, haven't you? Any word on Ginny and Ron? Sirius shook his dark head. I'm sorry. They're not home yet. Still, both are hale and hearty, according to your mum's clock. Percy sighed. I'm sure they're fine. Still, if you wouldn't mind adding their names to the missing persons list in the main hall for me, in case they turn up without their memories or something. He drew his cloak more tightly about him, a woebegone expression creeping across his freckled face. I'd better go, he said, and ducked out of the stairwell. This location is now hopelessly compromised indeed, Sirius remarked, as the third Weasley child disappeared down the hall. Why didn't he just say it straight out? This building is full of miserable Death Eaters whose fondest dream would be to make festive, if unconventional, balloon animals out of our internal organs. Not everyone possesses your fabulous descriptive powers, Padfoot. Too true. They ducked out of the stairwell and made their way back to the main hall, still a hive of feverish action. Lupin watched Sirius a little uneasily as they made their way across the parquet floor. Sirius had the air about him of being ready to do something unexpected. That was never a good sign. They paused in front of a long roll of parchment tacked to the wall near two of the larger doors. It had a number of names on it, most of which had been checked off, and a location noted where the whirlwind charm had dropped the subject. Knots of wizards and witches stood about, muttering in low voices. Sirius picked up the quill that was floating nearby and began to scratch Ron's name onto the bottom. I wouldn't bother if I were you, said a sour voice from behind them. He's not considered missing. He's considered to have run off. Lupin knew who it was before he turned around. Snape. He stood behind them in his customary black, his greasy hair half hiding his narrowed eyes, looking like a bat who had just swooped down from the high ceiling overhead. His long fingers were stained, as if he had come straight from his potions laboratory. Snape, Sirius said, what are you doing here? Dumbledore sent me to find you, Snape said. He had an urgent message he wanted me to deliver. All right, Sirius said, and folded his arms across his chest. What is it? Don't you think it would be better if we spoke outside? Snape demanded in a hissing whisper. No, Sirius said. I think it would be better if we spoke right here. Snape's eyes darted around the room. Then, with a sigh, he reached into his pocket and drew out a glass vial. He uncorked it and poured the potion onto the floor. A bright cloud of scarlet smoke flew up and enveloped the three of them inside a cloudy crimson bubble. Lupin could hear his own breathing, but other than that, there was total silence. No noise from outside the bubble penetrated at all. I take it nobody can hear us when we're in here, said Sirius. Exactly, but it's temporary, so listen closely. Snape spoke rapidly.
Professor Dumbledore has tasked me with telling you that you are once again charged with assembling the old group, as well as our allies. Headquarters will be at the Burrow. It's already been rewarded. Work quickly. We've very little time.
Barely had Snape finished speaking when the scarlet cloud disappeared, leaving Lupin feeling oddly exposed. He looked around, expecting that everyone would be staring at them, but nobody was.
I must get back to the school, Snape said. Dumbledore will owl you both later.
He began to walk away, but paused only after a few steps, and turned.
Have you any message for him?
He asked, slightly reluctantly. Sirius paused for a moment. Lupin knew that his dislike of Snape was battling it out with his desire for help from the man he admired most in the world. Finally, he said, "Tell him that Miss Granger is safe, in case he was worried. Ask him if he hears anything from Lucius about our boys. Anything at all. To please tell me immediately, even if it isn't good news." Snape looked at him for a long moment, then nodded briskly and walked off. Sirius took a deep breath. "I need some air, Moony," he said, his voice suddenly tight. Without a moment's hesitation, Lupin took his friend by the arm and steered him past a knot of wizards and witches. Once outside, Lupin released Sirius, who leaned heavily against one of the impressive marble pillars adorning the front of the ministry facade. He looked down at Sirius's hands, which were balled into fists at his sides. There were scars along his knuckles, scars he had gotten in Azkaban. Lupin had always noticed, but never asked Sirius how he had acquired them. "I'm so worried, Moony," Sirius said, looking away from him, towards the empty ministry gardens, their bare grounds covered with light powdering of snow. "I'm so worried about both of them I can barely breathe. The last thing I did was yell at them." Lupin pushed his own worry down and spoke convincingly. "They're fine. Look at your Viviscus charm." Sirius glanced down at the silver band around his wrist. The red stone in it pulsed brightly, as long as Harry was healthy and well. It was bright now. "I know," he said. "If it wasn't for that, I'd have gone mad ages ago. I know Harry's all right, and if he's all right, then Draco is too. Lucius would have to walk over Harry's dead body if he wanted to hurt Draco. I know that. I know it, but I don't feel it." "Breathe, Sirius," Lupin said, and took a step forward to put a hand on his friend's shoulder. He was tense as an iron bar. "You'll feel better once we're doing something." Sirius nodded and put his hand over Lupin's own. "I just keep seeing Draco's face when I was shouting at them outside the inn. Like I've never stolen a broomstick in my life." Lupin couldn't help it. He laughed. "That may be true, but that won't affect how you feel when you see them in danger. You're their father, after all." Sirius didn't say anything to this, merely looked fixedly into the distance. "I spent all those years in Azkaban for murder, but I've never killed anyone," he said quietly. "But if I get my hands on Lucius Malfoy, I will kill him, even if it means I go back to Azkaban for it. I'll kill him." "No, you won't," Lupin said matter-of-factly, "because I'll do it for you." For a moment they stood there, motionless, Sirius looking at his feet, Lupin looking out over the grounds. He was startled out of his reverie by the sound of footsteps on snow. He turned and glanced behind him. A red-headed girl was following her parents down the steps towards a waiting carriage, and had glanced back over her shoulder to look at him. He recognized her, belatedly, as he had not had her in a class since she was 13, but had seen her often enough among Slytherin students. Blaise Zabini, Draco's girlfriend. Something was scratched into the mantel above the fireplace in Lucius's study. Harry squinted, but could not read the words. It was warm in the room, despite the fact that the fire had died down in the grate. Harry turned away from it to stare at Lucius. "Would you like a drink?" said the other man finally, and raised his hand. A decanter on the sideboard rose into the air and came to hover by his side. Harry shook his head. Lucius, seeming indifferent, allowed the decanter to pour him a glass of port, then took a long and thoughtful sip. Harry dug his nails into his palms and spoke evenly. "If he's really ill," he said, "you shouldn't leave him up there like that. It's too cold. He might die too soon, and then where would you be?" "Doubtless you're right," Lucius replied, with an affected sigh. "Very short-sighted of me. One of my many faults." Harry said nothing. One of the useful things he had learned from Draco was how effective silence could be when utilized as a weapon. If he waited, Lucius would get impatient and speak. He did. "It is very interesting how much you have changed, Harry Potter," Lucius said. "How much of you has bled away through this connection you share with my son? And yes, I know all about it. Do you even know who you are anymore?" "I know exactly who I am," Harry said coldly. "How sad for me," Lucius said, taking a slender enamelled pipe out of the wooden drawer on his left and tapping it against the side of the desk. "And here I had so hoped we would become close." "Do you always want to become close with people you're planning to kill?" Harry asked. Lucius laughed and reached for a small gilded box that Harry had thought was a paperweight. He opened it and withdrew a pinch of tobacco. "I'm not going to kill you," he said. "I have thought a great deal about the best way to get my son to cooperate with me, and have concluded that killing you at this juncture would be relatively ineffective towards that end." "I'm touched," Harry said. Lucius chuckled and raised a small gold wand from the desktop. "Tell me, what will you do once Draco is dead?" Harry stood where he was and tried to imagine what life would be like without Draco. But it was like trying to imagine what it would be like to be paralyzed. Draco existed as a part of him. "Why do you hate him so much?" Harry finally whispered. He heard his own voice as if from a great distance, wondered, vaguely, if Draco could hear or experience anything of this through him. He hoped not. "I understand why you hate me, but Draco? He's your son. He loves you. Loved you, anyway, and still would if you hadn't burned all that out of him. What did he ever do to you?" There was a long silence. The fire crackled harshly in the grate, the afternoon shadows lengthening across the floor. "I told Draco this once, a long time ago," Lucius said, his voice curiously flat. Harry had not heard him speak like this before. "When a man pledges himself to the Dark Lord, when he receives the mark, he must give to the Dark Lord one thing to prove his loyalty. One gift. It must be something of precious personal value. I have seen men give up a great talent for music or art, a treasured memory, a grand passion. What I gave up was my own
capability to care about him. You gave up your ability to love?
Harry asked. It felt bizarre, asking such a personal question of Lucius Malfoy, but his curiosity was stronger than his anxiety. No, Lucius said, his eyes going to the window, and for a moment he seemed to gaze into nothingness. Just my feelings of parental love.
Harry began falteringly. Couldn't it be reversed somehow? I mean, all spells are reversible. Reversed? Lucius's voice was suddenly icy again. Why would I want it reversed? I am satisfied with the bargain I made. To gain much, one must sacrifice much, and I have gained vastly.
Harry thought of Draco, up on the tower. He reached out with his mind for him, but felt only an uncommunicative silence. Anxiety gnawed at his stomach again, worse than before.
You didn't bring me down here just to tell me stories about the past, he said. What do you want from me? I brought you down here to offer you a bargain.
Lucius's voice had a razor edge now. Harry suspected that the older man was very much regretted having said anything at all about his gift to Voldemort.
What kind of bargain? It is simple. The Dark Lord wants Draco to sit at his right hand, as he was always meant to. But you stand in the way of all that, and therefore I am willing to make a trade.
The world turned dark around the edges.
A trade? Harry whispered. What kind of trade?
Lucius chuckled again.
If you agree to abandon Draco, to leave him to the will of the Dark Lord, I'll give you what you want. And what exactly do I want?
Harry said, his head spinning.
This,
Lucius said, and from an inner pocket of his robe he drew an object and set it down on the desk in front of him. Harry stared. It was a clear glass vial, the size of a rolled parchment. The top and bottom of the vial were thickly encrusted with wine-colored jewels. Inside was perhaps 2 inches of pale greenish liquid.
More poison?
Harry said, weary bitterness creeping into his voice.
No, Lucius replied. Antidote.
Hermione lay awake in Ginny's bed, staring up at the ceiling. She could not sleep. Restlessness hummed in her blood. When she shut her eyes, she saw Harry's face, pale and worried, when he turned away from her back at school. Not having seen him since, she fretted. What if he died? And the last thing she had ever said to him was that she didn't want to be with him anymore. Giving up on sleep, she sat up slowly and rested her chin on her knees. Thinking about what would happen to her if Harry died had always filled her with shuddering nausea. She remembered Draco telling her that she couldn't imagine a world without Harry in it.
Oh, but I can,
she thought grimly.
I just don't want to.
She got up and padded quietly into the bathroom in search of water. After lighting the torch with a whispered "Lumos," she stared discontentedly at herself in the mirror over the sink. So this was what love looked like. Dark shadows under the eyes, pinched pallor, unhappy mouth. Gazing at her own face, she spared a flash of ironic pity for Pansy. Anyone who had to wear her face to feel pretty and lovable. She paused, the glass of water halfway to her mouth. What on earth had put this diabolical scheme into Pansy's head? Why Ron? What had he said, or so nearly had said to her when they'd been imprisoned in Slytherin's castle, had always stayed with her, although he had never mentioned it again. There was something there. Pansy must have caught onto it. A look, a phrase, a gesture, something about Ron. Something about Ron. Hermione put the glass down on the sink, slowly and carefully, as something tickled the back of her mind, something she could not push down or ignore. As quietly as she could, she doused the light and left the bathroom, creeping down the hall past Charlie's room and crossing the landing to the stairs. A quick anti-creaking spell took care of the noise as she padded upstairs and slipped into Ron's room. Lighting the lamp, she glanced around. It looked exactly as it always had, neat and tidy, covered with posters. The same frayed orange bedspread, the same stack of photographs sitting on the table, where Ron must have placed them after pulling them down off the walls, the same pile of comics by the bed. She knelt down by the desk of drawers and opened the largest, sliding it out completely and placing it on the floor. There was a box inside, which she had intimate knowledge of, as she had given it to Ron herself at the end of the summer. It was wood and painted blue with a gold embossed seal on the top. Mahoney's Divination Supplies, 14 Diagon Alley. Prying the lid off, she sat back and gazed at the box's contents thoughtfully. There was a small scrying bowl made of copper, a pack of tea leaves, with a small instructional booklet on how to use them, a sphere of dark crystal on a bronze stand, on which was etched the words, "I hold the secrets." Hermione lifted the sphere thoughtfully in her hand, then brought it down, hard, smashing the crystal ball against the metal edge of Ron's bedside table. She braced herself for the noise of it shattering, but to her surprise, it broke apart neatly in 2 perfect halves. A small, carefully rolled bundle of handwritten parchments tumbled out. They had been folded over and over and wound around with a thin silver chain. With a sigh, she picked up the small packet and dropped it into her robe pocket, where it sat heavily just over her heart. "So, that's the deal," Harry said. He'd been pacing up and down the top of the tower since the Death Eaters had brought him back, but now he stopped and put his hands behind his back, looking at Draco. Draco reached up and pushed back a strand of hair. The adamantine cuff seared a cold line across his skin. "The antidote in exchange for you abandoning me. Seems simple enough." "Well," Harry said, "what do we do now?" There was a short silence. Then Draco spoke, his tone very careful. "What do you mean? What do we do now?" Harry hesitated and looked harder at Draco, but the other boy's face was set and unreadable, his silver eyes serious and dark. "Well, I'm not going to abandon you," he said vehemently. "But if I don't, then we don't get the antidote." A strange, uncompromising weariness had settled on Draco. It was as if he looked at Harry from a great distance, through clouds of muffling fog. "Then we don't get the antidote," he said. Realization flooded Harry's face. He went very red, then very white. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying there's no point," Draco said. "If my father says it's an antidote, then it's probably an antidote. But there'll be some loophole, some clever excuse not to give it to us. He'll keep holding it over our heads, make us dance like puppets on strings, and we'll still lose in the end." "He said it would save your life," said Harry. "And it will, for now," Draco said. "But there'll be something else, and something else after that. You see how he is. He thinks he owns me. And as long as I exist under his power, then he'll make it a stick to beat you with. If you give in now, he'll just know that it works." Harry shook his head. "It doesn't matter. None of that matters right now. What matters is what we can do right now, this minute. And right now you're dying, and we have to stop it." Draco heard himself laugh out loud. Not a very pleasant laugh, either. "This is why you're such a bad planner, Potter," he said, as if the world doesn't exist past the next 5 seconds. Harry closed his eyes and balled his hands into fists. Draco could tell that he was trying to get a hold of himself, and watched him with a detached feeling of sickness in his stomach. He did not like hurting Harry, and wondered, in a delusory sort of way, why he always seemed to be forced into circumstances where there was no other choice. "I'm not going to let your father dictate whether you live or die," Harry said fiercely. "What would you do if it was the other way around? What would you do if it was me dying?" "That would be different," said Draco, unfazed. "How? How is that different?" "Because you're Harry Potter." Draco's voice was clear and toneless. "The boy who lived. The one who'll save everyone. You're needed. I'm not." "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard," Harry said bitterly. "I can't believe you take who I am and throw it in my face like that. You think I could live with myself knowing that I let you die because I'm famous and you're not?" "It's not about being famous. And anyway, my father said he'd memory charm us both, so you wouldn't really know." Harry stared at him. The pupils of his eyes had dilated so far that they looked black, rimmed with faint bands of green. "I have never, ever in my life wanted to hit someone as much as I want to hit you right now," he said. "Hit me if you want," Draco said quietly, "but know this. If you let my father win, then Voldemort wins. You're a hero, aren't you? This is a hero's choice. Your friends, or everything else." Harry's hands at his sides flexed, and Draco wondered for an odd, detached moment if Harry really was going to hit him. Then Harry said, in a clear, factual voice, "I should hope that you would know what I would choose." Draco looked at him, and realized with an odd sort of shock that he didn't know. He would have assumed Harry would have chosen everything else. He opened his mouth to ask, couldn't think of a way to formulate the question, and then lost the opportunity forever. For at that moment, the tower door opened again, and Lucius stepped through. He was not smiling, but had an expectant look about him. "So, Harry," he said, looking directly at the boy in question, "have you made up your mind?" Harry made to take a step forward, but Draco held him back. As if he sensed his son's thoughts, Lucius turned a glass-bright smile on Draco. He reached into his pocket and took out a clear vial, which Draco recognized immediately from Harry's description. He set it down on the stones at his feet and looked at them. It was evident from his posture that he was making it clear that should Harry not do as he had commanded, he would crush the vial under his boot. "Calm yourself, boy," he said, as gently as Draco had ever heard him speak. "Let your friend save you, if that's what he wants to do. Perhaps you can do the same for him later." The gentle tone in Lucius's voice was too much to bear, and Draco briefly looked away from his father towards Harry. He closed his eyes. If he could see, he couldn't do what he needed to do. He judged the distance to his father, and took a step forward, then another. He heard Lucius begin to speak. Then Draco lashed out with his foot, a hard, swift kick, the toe of his boot connecting with the vial. He opened his eyes and saw it fly into the air and shatter against the low parapet wall. Green fluid and glass splashed over the flagstones. Harry's eyes went wide, uncomprehending at first. Then he went white. He glanced at his friend, but Draco was looking at his father. Lucius looked shocked beyond reason, and something else underneath that, something that looked almost like furious respect.
"You realize what you've done?"
Lucius said to his son, his voice a fierce whisper.
"That's all there was. There is no more."
"I figured," Draco said. Lucius's mouth thinned into a razor line.
"You're a fool,"
he said, then turned on his heel and stalked through the door, slamming it hard behind him. Draco turned around and looked at Harry. He had expected rage and resentment, even disdain or contempt. But Harry did not seem angry. He had gotten down on his knees and was carefully gathering up all the bits of broken vials scattered over the stones. His hands were shaking as he did so, looking for the half-invisible slivers of clear glass.
"Potter, what are you doing?"
Harry looked up slowly, and Draco could see his eyes, the set of his chin, and the twist to his mouth.
"Maybe it's not all gone," he said. "There might be some left."
Draco didn't say anything about the sheer impossibility of this, just stood where he was, looking at the other boy.
"Don't, Harry,"
he said, and knelt down next to him.
"There isn't any point."
Harry raised his chin. His eyes were abnormally clear.
"Why didn't your father put a memory charm on us right away, as soon as you smashed the vial?"
"We made him angry. There's no telling what else he'll do," Draco said wearily. Harry looked down.
"Tear a piece off my cloak,"
he said.
"I need it to save the glass end."
Draco did, folding the glass slivers into the bit of cloth. He knew it was a waste of time, but did it anyway, not looking at Harry. The odd kneeling position was making him sweat, so he handed the folded cloth to the other boy and rubbed his damp hands on his cloak.
"What a mess," he whispered under his breath.
"Look, maybe if we—" But he never got to finish his sentence, as a tower door opened for the third time that day, and Harry sucked in a gasp. Draco twisted around and stared. The person standing in the door was not Lucius Malfoy, or a Death Eater either. It was a slender figure in a yellow cloak, like a torch in the darkness, her bright hair falling all around her face, which was very white. Draco got to his feet, still staring in disbelief.
"Ginny, what the hell are you doing here?"
Hermione had spread the parchments out on the desk and was going through them with a shaking hand. She had managed to push her horror at being impersonated to the back of her mind. Now it leapt out afresh. Pansy had copied her handwriting, copied it so well that even her best friend had been duped by it. The letters she was looking at had her expressions, her turns of phrase. She must have planned this for so long, Hermione thought, her skin crawling, watching me so closely. The hair prickled along Hermione's spine, and she shivered. "Dearest, I missed you today. I thought about you so much during potions that I forgot to take notes. Pretty soon I'll be facing my greatest fear. What was it you said? A homework paper that only got 9 out of 10? I can't wait to see you tonight. I wish I didn't have so much work to do for my final project. I know it's because I've been spending so much time with you that it isn't ready. We can work on the project together.
if you don't mind me bringing some homework with me. Imagine me creeping along the corridors to you, my pockets full of burdock, mugwort and rue. If you wouldn't mind bringing the yarrow root as well, that would help. Now, don't forget. All I want is just to spend time with you, of course, except that will have to wait until after Christmas, won't it? Thank you, darling, for your obedience and ability to understand. I know it's been hard keeping this, the most darkest of secrets. Won't it be a relief when we can finally be together without any hiding? Oh, Lord, someone's coming. I must run. I love you. I hope that you'll always love me. Hermione. A frown crinkled the side of Hermione's mouth. Burdock, mugwort, and rue? What was that about? Something Ron had said to her before he left school leapt suddenly into her mind. It wasn't just sex, you know. We talked, we ate together, we did our potions homework. She looked again at the letter. The transition from the first paragraph into the second was fairly subtle. The entreaty to bring ingredients for a potion was buried under endearments, but Hermione had a feeling it was the real gist of the letter. None of the letters, upon more careful perusal, were all that passionate. They were carefully, if affectionately, worded, which would have been Hermione's style had she actually written them. She was not much of a love letter writer, had never written one to Harry, and could not imagine doing so. She loved him, but the idea of sitting down and writing a paean to his green eyes and adorable nose struck her as faintly ridiculous. Perhaps she had no poetry in her soul, but there it was. Slowly, she lifted her wand and touched the end of it to the paper. There was a simple rhyming charm. Ink and parchment, quill and bone, let this letter's truth be shown. Quill and inkpot, seal and feather, reveal the writer of this letter. The parchment trembled. Then the words on the paper rearranged themselves to form a name. Pansy Parkinson. Hermione shrugged to herself as the name on the parchment melted away and the original content returned. Well, she'd expected it to be Pansy. No surprise there. She bit her lip. There was one more thing she could do, but hadn't done it because she was afraid of the answer. In DADA, they had learned that certain kinds of confundus charms could be woven into written material. The famous Book You Could Never Stop Reading contained one of the strongest obedience charms ever woven into the text. Revilitus confundus, she murmured. The parchment trembled again. This time the words did not melt away. Only some of them darkened and stood out against the rest of the text. Final project is ready. Bring burdock, mugwort, and yarrow root. Now forget all except your obedience to the Dark Lord, and always love me. Hermione read the highlighted words out with an audible exclamation of dismay. Sitting back on her heels, she shook her head, a heavy foreboding settling over her. "Oh, Ron," she said aloud, "what did Pansy do to you?" The exhaustion was so bad now that it was painful. Ron could not calculate how long he had gone now, but the hours upon hours of chess had taken such a toll on his concentration that it seemed like much more. He could no longer tell pawns from knights or bishops. The pieces were heavy as rocks in his numb fingers. He had always enjoyed playing this game. Now it was beginning to sicken him. Every time a game ended, he hoped against hope it would be the last one. But then the Dark Lord waved his hand, and the board was magically renewed.
and the deadly voice said,
"Again!"
He willed his mind to concentrate, willed himself to formulate some kind of strategy. Nothing came to mind. He had won several games and lost several games. It had not seemed to matter either way. Ron had begun to think that this was not chess at all, but merely some refined form of torture. Slowly, he picked up his knight and looked down. His exhausted mind struggled to make sense of the board, to decipher its patterns. It seemed to waver in front of him, rippling as if a cloud of heat were passing over it. His right hand spasmed, and the knight fell out of his limp fingers, striking the travertine board with a harsh, echoing click. That's what did it. The click. The sound of it was like the sound of a switch being flipped inside Ron's mind. Without warning, the world ripped down the center like fruit being peeled in half. His ears roared, and agonizing pain shot through his knees and elbows. A moment later, he realized this was because he had tumbled out of his chair, hit the floor, and crumpled. He rolled over and stared up at a world of shifting shadows.
"What's happening?" he whispered. "It hurts." "What do you see, boy?"
said the knife-like voice of the Dark Lord.
"Tell me what you see."
The shapes moved and coalesced, then raced by him like scenery viewed from a train window. Images fluttered rapidly by, visible but inaudible, like dreams painted in harsh reality. Nothing had ever been like this before. The future rushed towards him and swallowed him up. He was still the center of the turning world, the power of it almost too much to contain. He was inside it now, staring out.
"I see,"
he said, the words spilling out of his mouth before he could stop them.
"I see the sky black with smoke, and the wizarding houses in England, and the sky over them is full of death." "Very good," said Voldemort. "Tell me more. Do you see Harry Potter?" "Harry? I do see Harry. He has blood all over his hands. He's going over the water. Charm around his neck is gone." "Do you see Lucius's son?" Voldemort asked impatiently. No, I don't see him. I can't see him." A whispered laugh. "Look again," the Dark Lord said. "Look harder." But Ron barely heard him. He was adrift in a world of images that no longer made any sense. He saw the sky lit by dazzling fire, saw a crumpled body inside a pentagram, saw flames leap from the windows of the ministry. He saw Hermione, who turned and looked at him with an awful sadness. He saw himself surrounded by green light, as if he stood under water. He saw the runic band that Harry wore, shattered into fragments, and he cried out, although he never knew until later what name he had called. All he knew was the darkness as it overwhelmed him and drew him down into a merciful oblivion. "I thought I'd find you two up here," Ginny whispered. "Are you all right?" Draco simply stood and stared back at her. The expression on his face was so complex as to be utterly unreadable. It was Harry who moved. He got to his feet and strode over to her. "Ginny," he said, taking hold of her shoulders, "did anyone see you come up here?" She shook her head. "No, I followed the Death Eaters. The door wasn't locked, so I just waited for them to go downstairs." "Ginny," Draco said, his shock at seeing her finally ebbing away, "how did you get back into the manor?" "I used the time turner to go back an hour," she returned candidly, and Draco was stunned back into silence. "We have to get out of here," said Harry quietly and quickly, "before Lucius comes back."
He twisted around to look at Draco, his hands still on Ginny's shoulders. "Can you get us out of the manor?" Draco's eyes narrowed to silver crescents. "I can bloody well try," he said. "You lead us," Harry said, without looking at Draco, and for the first time, Ginny saw that there was a terrible sadness in his eyes that went beyond the normal anxiety of their situation. Draco said nothing, only slipped past Ginny like a shadow, silent and light-footed. She trailed him, and Harry came behind, following in Draco's straight and slender shadow as he made his way down the stairs. At the foot, he turned sharply right and ducked down a corridor where he pushed a tapestry aside, which had a door behind it. "Secret staircase," he said quietly, and put his hand to the doorknob. It opened smoothly under his touch, and he exhaled a breath of relief and held the door open so that Ginny and Harry could pass through. This second staircase was even narrower, and there was no torchlight at all. A dim, phosphorescent glow came from the walls, and there was a dank smell, as if they were standing at the bottom of the sea. "I have my wand," Ginny said quietly. "No." Draco caught at her hand, and something hard banged against her fingers. She looked down, and saw a clear adamantine cuff around his wrist. "No magic here." She nodded, as Harry brushed past them, to lead the way, turning sideways to get around the first narrow turn of the spiral staircase. Ginny looked up at Draco. He looked distant and distracted. Not sad, but something altogether harder. "Are you sure you're all right?" she said in a very soft voice. "Yes," he said, his voice cool and effectless. "I seem to recall having rescued you from a tower once before," she said, as lightly as she could, hoping to chase away some of the seriousness from his eyes. He looked at her, and a faint smile did touch the corners of his mouth. "Are you two coming?" Harry hissed from around the corner. Together they turned and went after him. "Where does this passage go?" Harry was asking now. "Under the moat," Draco said. "It lets out in the rose garden. Or should, anyway." "All right. Assuming we can get outside. What then?" Harry asked. "Will we be safe if we walk to Malfoy Park?" Draco shook his head. "The park isn't safe," he said. "Everyone in town is in my father's pocket." "What about broomsticks?" Ginny asked. Draco shook his head again. "It wouldn't be a good idea to take them," he said. "The valuable artifacts here tend to be charmed. Trust me on that." "If we get beyond the park, could we apparate?" Harry asked. Draco smiled back in response. "I think we can, yes," he admitted. "Well, what are we waiting for?" Ginny replied. "Let's get a move on." They continued through the passageway that Draco had indicated, which did, indeed, open out into the rose garden, and by the time they reached the end of it, Ginny was nearly fainting. It was so rank and close underneath the moat that her dormant claustrophobia had awakened. As Draco fiddled with the heavy catch on the trap-door above, she had to lean against the dripping stone walls until, finally, it popped open and clean night air flooded in. Ginny exhaled a breath of relief, and Draco looked at her, but it was Harry who spoke. "Let me go first," he said, and went, clambering up the rough wall and through the open trap-door, as agile as a lizard, his booted feet dangling at Ginny's eye level as he pulled himself up. Then they were gone, replaced by Harry's hand as he reached down to her. "Come on," he said. "I'll pull you up." Ginny took hold of him, and Harry hauled her up. In a moment she was sprawled beside him on the snow, and he was helping Draco up as well. The other boy landed on his knees and hands beside her, then spun around to slam the trapdoor shut behind them. "Let's go," he said, and got to his feet. Harry looked at him, then said something that Ginny found peculiar. "Can you run if we have to?" Draco didn't say anything back. only nodded silently. She looked from one of them to the other, Harry's white face, Draco's set one, and decided not to ask. She wondered what Lucius had done to them up on that tower. Physically, they seemed unharmed, but there were other ways of hurting a person. "Come on," Draco said, and gestured for them to follow him. They had emerged at a point about 100 meters from the house proper. It loomed behind them like the bulwark of an enormous ship. All the windows of the lower floors were darkened, save for the tawny torchlight that flared from the upper stories like a line of flame along the ridge of a distant mountain. Long white rows of trees like orderly bones stretched away in every direction, their branches woven with slender threads of ice. Snow was piled everywhere like heaps of sugar pressed under glass. Ginny's feet crunched loudly as she walked, making her wince. They continued to move, cutting along the side of a low hill, and came around it to see the walls that surrounded the manor. High, unbreachable stone, with a pattern of interwoven M's along the top. Farther down, there was a gap in the wall, where the enormous wrought iron gate stood, frosted all over with ice. The bronze bolt that held it shut was as thick as a man's arm. Ginny saw Draco straighten his shoulders. "Almost there," he said. They continued in silence. The only sound was the crackle of ice snapping underfoot as they walked, and when they reached it, Harry paused at the gate and glanced back at Draco, who stepped forward and reached out to draw back the bolt. The gate opened without a sound, and they slipped through it, Harry first, then Ginny, and Draco last. He closed the gate behind them, and Ginny heard the sound of the bolt drawing itself shut on the other side. Draco exhaled a breath of relief. "Now," he began, but never got to finish his sentence. An unearthly wail suddenly split the night. Ginny paused and listened. It was not a human noise at all. It was the sound of a baying dog. No sooner had she thought it than it was joined by other similar cries. Not a dog, but a pack of them. She turned quickly and looked at Harry and Draco. Harry looked confused, but Draco didn't. He looked horrified, and so pale that the thin scar high on his smooth cheekbone looked like a livid thread of silver. "Great Merlin," he said. "He's let loose the hellhounds." Hermione opened her eyes. Something was fluttering incessantly against her face in the darkness. She sat up, brushing it away, then realized it was one of Pigwidgeon's wings. He was hovering above her, holding a letter in one small claw. She sat up and reached out a hand for it. "Thanks, Pig." It was an ordinary piece of rolled parchment, tied with a bit of string. She held it for a moment before opening the letter. Pig settled on her right shoulder. She suspected he missed Ron, and let him remain there as she opened the missive, which was extremely short. "Hermione, I must speak with you, and sent up the little owl so you wouldn't be frightened. I'm waiting for you downstairs at the front door. Please don't tell anyone I'm here. I can't let anyone else see me. Come downstairs. It's about Draco." She stared at the signature for several long moments in disbelief. Perhaps this was some kind of joke? How could she possibly think? Hermione jumped back with an exclamation as a letter in her hand disintegrated into ashes. "Damn these paranoid Slytherins," she thought furiously, and swung her legs over the edge of the bed. Drawing a flowered robe of Ginny's out of the closet, she shrugged it on and headed downstairs, righteous indignation giving her feet wings, and within a moment she was standing in the entryway, pulling the bolts on the front door back and drawing it wide. The slender figure on the front steps jumped and turned around. She was wrapped in a thick green cloak with the hood pulled up. Hermione had a moment to take in the golden border on it before speaking.
"So," she said frostily, "you wanted to talk to me about Draco?" The hood trembled for a moment, then it was pushed decisively back, and a cascade of red gold curls tumbled out. Her breath puffed out in white clouds of frozen air as Blaise Zabini stared at Hermione with a mute, resentful appeal. "Let me come in," she said. "We can talk inside." Later, Draco would remember their mad dash from the gates of the manor to the edge of Malfoy Park as a nightmare of crazily tilting shadows. Ice had hardened over the road, making it smooth as glass and treacherous to run on. He had never been so glad for his heavy-soled dragonhide boots. Ginny seemed to be having more trouble. Twice he caught her as she slipped. Twice she righted herself quickly and kept running. Harry, of course, being Harry, was having no trouble. He was built to run, and ran like the snow fell, like he flew, as if it was his one purpose. At the foot of a small hill the road forked. They went left, towards what should have been the lights of the park. The town was dark. The inhabitants batted down like a ship in a storm. They ran towards the cold Christmas inn and past it, the sound of baying growing closer and closer behind them. Draco knew the hellhounds of Malfoy Manor well enough from his childhood. It had amused his father to purchase rare monsters and turn the hellhounds loose to hunt them across the grounds. Draco had seen them pull down a full-size griffin and rip it apart with their teeth and claws. Twice the size of ordinary dogs, with long slavering jaws and eyes the size of oranges. They had given him nightmares for years. They were also fast, very fast. Draco knew the three of them had a head start of almost the full length of the gardens. He also knew it would not be enough. By the time they reached the clearing, the sound of yelps and barking behind them was so loud it sounded like the crackle of a bonfire. Harry spilled into the clearing first, then Ginny, and Draco last. It was just as he remembered it. The inn up on the hill in the distance, the broomsticks stuck fast into the tree overhead, the steep incline that fell away to the iced-over river. Harry stopped under the tree and spun around, his cloak flying out. "We have no choice. We have to operate now." Ginny reached out then and took hold of Harry's sleeve, and a moment later she felt something grasp her arm. It was Draco, his grip as hard as iron. "Quickly, Harry," said Draco in his head. He didn't answer, just closed his eyes and thought of the first place that came to mind. Unbidden, the only place he could think of was the only place that had ever felt like a second home. The Burrow sprang into his head as if it had been waiting for him. Harry felt a sharp pain in his heart as he thought of it, but used it to focus his mind, thinking of the lopsided house with its rustic charm. Then he turned on his heel and prayed that this, his first apparition, would get them there safely. The door to Ginny's bedroom closed behind the two girls with an audible click. Hermione walked across the room to the armchair by the bed, turned and sat down. She raised her chin and looked at Blaise. "So," she said, "what do you want?" A smile touched the corner of Blaise's perfect mouth before she glanced casually around the room. She walked over to a row of photographs tucked above Ron's bed and began to examine them. Hermione wondered what on earth she would find in those photographs to rivet her attention. They were mostly photographs of the Weasleys, some of Harry and herself, and some of Ginny's school friends at Beauxbatons. "I was at the ministry with my parents this afternoon, and I saw Professor Lupin there with that convict godfather of Potter's," Blaise began casually.
Hermione did not bother offering the correction that Sirius was no longer a convict. She sat without moving, while Blaise shrugged off her embroidered cloak to reveal plain slacks and a green cowl-necked jumper. She still looked dazzling. It was very irritating. "I heard Draco's father kept him and Potter back at the manor," Blaise said. "Is that true?" "As far as I know," admitted Hermione. "Then they're in terrible danger," Blaise said. "All of you are. This is much bigger than it looks. Much bigger than you could possibly imagine. They don't tell us very much, but I've heard things." Blaise took a deep breath, and Hermione realized that she was genuinely frightened. "Why are you telling me this, Blaise? I mean, give me one reason to believe your visit here wasn't motivated entirely by malice. So far, you've told me that my friends are in danger, which I knew. You don't like me. You don't like Harry. You're a Slytherin through and through, and I can't imagine they'd be happy with you if they knew you were here. So why risk it?" "You're a Gryffindor just as much as I'm a Slytherin." Blaise's tone was confident. "You won't tell them, even though you hate me, too." Hermione felt very tired. "I don't hate you, Blaise. I just don't have a good reason to trust you." "Yes, you do," Blaise said. "Draco—" Hermione thought of what she had read today back at the library and tensed. "What about him?" "I should hate him," Blaise said, and Hermione felt as if she were talking to herself now. "And I guess I sort of do? But I've known him since we were children. I can't just... I mean, I know he's impossible. He's arrogant and self-centered," Hermione offered. "Yes," Blaise agreed enthusiastically. "And he never listens, and he always thinks he's right, especially when he isn't. And if you aren't someone he loves, you might as well not exist at all," Hermione added softly. "How would you know?" Blaise asked, sounding bitter for a moment. "He loves you." "I'm sure he loves me too," Blaise scoffed. "No, he was just using me to draw attention away from the people he really cares about. I know that because it seems so logical now when I look back on it." "How long did it take you to figure out?" Hermione asked. "Not long. When he first came to my house to ask me out, he offered me money." Blaise took in Hermione's horrified stare, and her lips twisted. "My father died in service to you-know-who, and my mother took it badly. She lost all our coin drinking her sorrows away. My mother doesn't know how to live without money. She's always had it and couldn't adjust. Then Draco came. He knew, of course. Everyone in my mother's little circle knew. She and Narcissa were best friends once. So when Draco came and offered me enough money, he said that I just had to be his girlfriend. Just for a year." Hermione was speechless. She had no idea what to think, and wasn't sure who she was more disgusted with. Blaise for accepting such an offer, or Draco for offering it in the first place. Of course, neither of them would probably understand what was so horribly wrong with this arrangement. Blaise continued to speak, as if she had quite forgotten that Hermione was there. "I know what you're thinking, that I sold myself for pocket change. I suppose I did. He gave us money, and opened accounts for me in Hogsmeade so that I could buy whatever I wanted, and I suppose I pretended that we really were dating. All the girls in my house always loved him, and it was pleasant, being envied. And I thought maybe he did care for me, and had constructed this elaborate ruse so he could have me. He could have had me anyway, but I never told him that. Then, after a while, I began to see it wasn't me he was in love with." "I don't know what to say," Hermione replied honestly. Ought to think. I won't say it doesn't sound like something Draco would do, because of course it does. He can be sort of single-minded, I guess. You don't have to bother looking for nice ways to say it. Blaise shrugged lightly. I know what he is. Still, why come to me with this? Hermione asked. Because you love him more than you don't like me, Blaise said evenly. I see the way you are together, your little group and him. He's never said anything to me, but I always noticed. If you noticed, Hermione said, then you love him as well. A little. Blaise's face had shut like a fan, her eyes remote. Maybe we all do, to some degree or another. In his life, I think there's only ever been one person who didn't love him enough. Hermione felt a strange little shock inside her, and understood what Blaise meant, and agreed with her. In that moment, she made the unconscious decision to trust the Slytherin girl. Blaise exhaled a breath. Then she did something peculiar. She raised her hands and unpinned a glittering barrette that held her hair back. It swung forward in a heavy tumble of dark red gold. She looked at it in her hand for a moment, before handing it to Hermione, who stared. Draco doesn't know it, but I pinned one of these to his cloak a long time ago. Now, I want you to have the other one, she said. Hermione balked. Why? What is it? It's all I've got. It's protection magic. Very hard to come by. Pansy told me she made her own and gave it to Weasley, so you don't have to worry about him, at least. Hermione glanced at the Slytherin girl, then looked down at the barrette, but there seemed to be nothing terribly special about it. They were not jeweled, but made of some shimmering green material, somewhat like titanium. If this is dangerous, or some kind of tracking spell, it isn't. Blaise snapped, exasperated. Look, when you can, just get both Harry and Draco to a safe place, all right? Not here. The whole ministry will be looking for them. Her voice trailed off at the look on Hermione's face. What? What makes you think I'll ever see them again to get them to a safe place? Hermione said in a small voice, hating herself for being vulnerable in front of Blaise, but too unhappy to stop it. Blaise looked at her, surprise making her face transparent, and for a moment Hermione thought she could look through the other girl's shut expression to the real Blaise underneath, and she could see that the other girl loved Draco. They'll come back to you, Blaise said. They always do. For a moment, Hermione couldn't think of anything to say. Then she cleared her throat. And Ron? You said Pansy'd given him something already. So when he gets back, do I have to get him to a safe place too? The transparency vanished from Blaise's expression. Now she merely looked surprised. You mean he isn't? She broke off and spun around, green eyes widening. What was that noise? Hermione leapt to her feet. The kitchen door. Blaise went white. Oh no. There was a world of dread in those two words, and in a moment she had apparated away. Hermione shook her head. Typical bloody Slytherins, she muttered, with more bravado than she felt. Stepping cautiously out into the hall, she began making her way towards the stairs, as quietly as she could. It was dark and very quiet. As she neared the staircase, she thought she heard the sound of the kitchen door closing. No one dangerous should be able to get past the wards, but wards could be subverted. There were ways. Pulling out her wand, she began to make her way down the stairs. The Dark Lord reclined in the tall chair behind the chess table and regarded the air in front of him. It was full of dust motes. They hovered in the faint light of the narrow windows. The red-headed boy lay at his feet and had not moved in nearly half an hour now. What had been like a light inside him had spilled out like blood, and it seemed likely that he would not be useful again this evening. The girl inside her gold cage looked up. "Will he die, my lord?" she asked.
No. He utilized too much power. It drained him. He will recover, though,"
Voldemort said with a chuckle.
"But I have not even begun to get use out of him. The gift of fortune-telling is like divine clockwork. I have wound him up. Now, as a clock tells time, his mind will see only the future."
The sound of the door opening made the pair of them turn, and both saw Draco's father standing in the doorway.
"Lucius,"
the Dark Lord said, as the other strode into the room.
"How goes the capture of Harry Potter and your son?"
Lucius blushed, a bloodless rush of further pallor.
"I'm afraid they escaped, my lord,"
he replied in a tight voice. Voldemort went very still.
"I see,"
he said, looking very much like he wanted to use an unforgivable curse on the other man.
"Yet again you prove to be a disappointment. Tell me, Lucius, what do you think a fitting punishment would be for you?"
Lucius licked lips that had gone suddenly dry.
"My lord,"
he began, but Voldemort silenced him with a gesture.
"And while we are listing out your failures, I don't recollect telling you to poison your son,"
Voldemort said, and turned to pick up a chess piece where it had fallen, and began to examine it between his long white fingers.
"Must I remind you, Lucius, that that boy is mine? I will not have you spoiling him with toxins."
"He smashed the vial of antidote I tried to provide him, my lord," said Lucius very quietly. "A most unforeseen outcome, but I can make more."
"Can you?"
Voldemort's voice was lazy, curious.
"Such a powerful poison you used, so rare and ancient."
"The antidote is simple," Lucius blurted out, "save for one ingredient, which presents something of a conundrum."
"And why is that?"
For a fraction of a second, Lucius hesitated. "Because it doesn't exist," he said at last. "Not anymore." The Dark Lord glanced up at Lucius. In the gold cage, Rhys stirred and moaned as if in pain. There was silence. Then the Dark Lord rose slowly to his feet.
"For your failure, you will bleed, Lucius. You understand, of course, that I cannot have you constantly ruining my plans."
In the gilded cage, Rhys laughed softly. Lucius turned very white. "Of course, my lord. Whatever punishment you think is best, I am willing to endure."
"Good,"
said the Dark Lord lazily.
"Now kneel and beg me to hurt you."
Hermione was halfway down the stairs when she saw them. Ginny stepped out of the kitchen first, looking disheveled and exhausted. There was dirt on her soaked yellow cloak, and her damp hair was a wild tangle.
"Ginny, are you all right?"
Ginny looked up.
"Oh, Hermione."
Her voice was heavy with fatigue.
"Yes, I'm all right."
The kitchen door opened again, and Harry came through, followed by Draco, who was fumbling with the clasp that fastened his soaked and bedraggled cloak. Both were walking in a slow manner of those weary to the bone. She opened her mouth to call out to them, but only a gasp of surprise escaped her lips. Harry noticed her first. He raised his head and looked up. Draco followed his gaze, and they both stared blankly at her, as if they could not quite believe that she was there. She would always remember that moment later. It was not a long moment, and yet it seemed to go on and on. She stood and stared at them, and again the words in the book came back to her. She sat down suddenly on the stairs as realization and sudden despair weakened her knees.
"You know," she said, "don't you?"
"What's going on?" Ginny asked in a low voice as Harry went past her and came up the stairs and sat down next to Hermione. Draco looked at Hermione for a moment and felt no surprise that she had discovered the secret to what was really wrong with him. Then he turned to Ginny. "Come with me into the living room," he said. "I'll explain everything." Ginny looked at him and gave a small nod before following him into the other room. "I'd give you a handkerchief," Harry said after they had gone, "but I haven't got one." She looked up.
"I'm not crying," she said.
"Oh," Harry said. There was a momentary silence. "If you wanted to cry, I could go away," he offered. She looked more closely at him. Under the dirt and bruises, he was slightly wan-looking, but seemed healthy enough. The same reserve was in his eyes that she remembered, the same distance, but his expression was not unsympathetic. She realized with a start that this was the first time she had been alone with him since they had ended their relationship. It seemed 1,000 years ago.
"I don't want to cry. I want to go wake Charlie up and portkey ourselves back to Hogwarts before anything terrible happens."
If she expected any resistance, she didn't get any. "Good," said Harry decidedly. "I've been wanting to talk to Dumbledore, although I ought to talk to Sirius first. Is he here?"
Hermione shook her head. "He's back at Lupin's house. They're both fine, though. Everyone is except—"
Harry looked at her narrowly. "Except?"
"Ron,"
Hermione said finally, and tensed, not sure how Harry would react, but he looked merely surprised. "He's not back yet?"
"No, and Harry, I know about Pansy. Charlie told me."
"Better him than me," said Harry, his tone almost flippant. Then, at the look on her face, his voice softened. "I'm glad you weren't there when Draco let everyone know what happened. It was pretty horrible."
"Poor Ron," Hermione said softly. "He must have felt miserable. I mean, Pansy! He never even liked her. And to find out she was just trying to get at him for whatever reason, it must have been—"
"Awful," Harry said shortly, and Hermione gave a mute nod.
"Why did Draco do that?"
she asked, her voice very quiet. "I'm not really sure, and I'm not certain I want to know the reason."
"Oh,"
she said, then nodded, seeming to understand. "I'm not sure what happened to Ron after we were forced to stay at the manor," Harry continued, "but I have to tell you that Lucius told Draco that he had a month to live." Nausea rose up in the back of Hermione's throat, but she swallowed it down.
"I know," she said. "I found the answer in the library today."
Harry looked startled for a moment, then seemed to collect himself, some of the fierceness going out of his expression. "He won't die," he said.
He'll be fine. He said Snape's figuring out what the poison is, and Dumbledore will help us, and he'll be fine.
Hermione was dubious, but then she had always been more of an alarmist than Harry. She glanced down and started.
What's on your wrist?
Oh, an adamantine bracelet, he replied, then frowned. I don't suppose you can do anything about it.
No, she said, touching it lightly. Dumbledore will have to get it off for you. Lucius must have been pretty keen to stop you doing magic. Then again, you are the big, scary Harry Potter, she teased.
To her relief, he smiled wanly. I guess I am, he said.
I missed you,
she said suddenly. I missed you too, he said. With a little sigh, she leaned forward and rested her head against his shoulder, as she had done so many times in the past. For a moment he laid his hand gently on her back, holding her to him, and they sat together without moving. She inhaled the scent of him, sweat, faint traces of soap, and wet wool.
Thank you,
she whispered. His voice was muffled. For what?
For coming back to me,
she said. Apparently, it had been the wrong thing to say. He went rigid all over, as if his muscles had turned to iron, and he pulled back from her. You were right, he said, getting to his feet, his face averted so she couldn't see his expression. We'd better get back to Hogwarts quickly. It's not safe here. As she looked up at him in astonishment, he turned around and headed up the unlit stairs towards Charlie's room. After a moment, not knowing what else to do, she rose to her feet and followed him up into the darkness. You must be cold, Ginny said. After filling her in on all the details of the day, she had excused herself for a moment to change out of her wet cloak and dress. Her mind felt numb with dread, and upon returning, she had found Draco sprawled across the couch, as though he belonged there, his head on one of her mother's crocheted pillows. Do you want me to make some tea before we go? A faint mumble was her only answer.
Draco, she said softly, are you asleep?
He opened his eyes and looked at her through his lashes. I was getting there.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's all right. He propped himself up on his elbow and looked at her. She looked back and went to sit on the couch. He slid his feet off to make room for her, propping himself against the cushions. Then he reached out suddenly, with his left hand, where the adamantine cuff was locked securely around his thin wrist, and gently touched the edge of her fingers. She gingerly took hold of his wrist and bent to brush her cheek against the back of his hand.
I'm so sorry you're ill,
she said. I'll be fine. He was looking down at her. Their faces were very close. She could feel his breath against her cheek, stirring her eyelashes. An anticipatory tingle ran over her skin. Ginny, I wanted to tell you that. He broke off as Harry and Hermione came back into the room, followed closely by Charlie. Are you two ready to go? He asked when he saw them. Yes, Draco replied, seeming somewhat annoyed at being interrupted. Charlie nodded, looking very glum indeed. Good, he said. The sooner we can get you back to Hogwarts, the sooner Snape can help sort out all this mess. And Ginny and Draco rose off the couch to follow the others into the other room, where Charlie grabbed the portkey off the mantel of the fireplace, and they were all hurtling away into the darkness once more. The narrow corridor leading down to the potions dungeon was so poorly lit as to be a danger. Dumbledore waved a hand as he made his way down it, and red and gold sparks followed him, lighting his way. A small smile curled the corner of his mouth. He found the habitual darkness in which Severus Snape liked to work amusing. But then again, he found most things about Snape amusing. Severus knew this, and bore it grimly. Part of his penance, perhaps. Dumbledore was not sure. In the complex wall of guilt and intransience which Snape had built about himself, there were few chinks through which an onlooker might gaze and understand. Dumbledore had reached the entrance to the laboratory now, and ducked as he passed through the lower doorway. It was extremely dim inside, lit only by the light of a few faintly flaring torches. The walls and surfaces of multiple work tables were lined with jars, flasks, and vials of many-colored liquids. Fires burned, cauldrons bubbled, and enormous tomes of magic lay scattered everywhere. Dumbledore resisted the urge to move the Book of Gramarye to a place where it would not get essence of hemlock spilled on it.
"Hello, Severus?"
he said quietly to the man behind the largest work table. The potions master was busy adding several drops of olive of thornwood to a simmering cauldron, and for a moment did not reply. At last he glanced up and nodded. "Headmaster," he said by way of greeting, "what brings you down here?" He looked around, seeming to notice the darkness in the room for the first time. "It's late, isn't it?"
"It is almost 3 a.m, Severus."
"Ah, I seem to have lost track of time. I have been working." Dumbledore rested a hand on the wooden work table nearest him.
"I know. And how goes the work? Have you had any luck identifying the substance in young Malfoy's blood?"
Snape set the instrument he had been holding down on the work table before him and regarded it grimly. "No," he said. "There were only traces of the substance to be found. I have identified certain components: asphodel, belladonna, and monkshood. I suspect there might be unicorn blood or powdered horn, which gives the affected blood such a unique color. But none of that explains the side effects. Nor can I be sure what other elements might have broken down in the blood since the poison was administered. It is most frustrating."
"So it is a poison, then?"
"I cannot imagine what else it might be," Snape said. "But I certainly know of no bane which takes so long to take effect, and which produces such peculiar symptoms." Dumbledore paused for a moment.
"Young Malfoy arrived here this evening in the company of Harry Potter."
Snape said nothing to this, merely squinted at the headmaster.
"They claim to have eluded Lucius at the manor, and have come here seeking sanctuary, which, of course, I am happy to provide."
"Of course." Snape took up a beaker of purplish liquid and poured it into the cauldron. The substance within turned an unexpected gold color. "I suppose they had the usual entourage with them?"
"If you mean Miss Granger and Miss Weasley, yes."
"What of our erstwhile head boy?" Snape had begun searching among his flasks and vials for something. Seen through the tinted liquids inside, his face took on an odd-colored appearance: a blue cheekbone, hooked green nose, and orange chin. Dumbledore shook his head.
"Ronald Weasley is still missing."
"Unsurprising. If the rumors I have been hearing are to be believed, I wouldn't want to show my face around here either, were I him." Snape selected a vial of pink liquid and held it up to the faint overhead light. He poured some into a stone mortar filled with powder, picked up a pestle, and began to mix the contents into a reddish paste. "He's probably cowering somewhere, licking his wounds and feeling foolish. Dumbledore made a non-committal noise. Snape looked up at him sharply. You don't think so?
Not particularly, no. But that is not the issue at hand. We were speaking of the poison.
Yes. Does Lucius Malfoy know of it?
Apparently he claims to have ordered it administered,
Dumbledore said quietly. There was a short silence. Snape raised an eyebrow. Poisoning his own son, he remarked finally. You know who might not like that very much. I don't suppose, he added, that there is the slightest chance that Draco's escape from the manor will prove detrimental to Lucius's public standing.
Unlikely.
Dumbledore's tone was flat and heavy.
Sirius and Remus have already begun contacting all the old crowd, and the reports are coming in. It appears that the corruption at the Ministry is more deep-rooted than we had ever imagined. We have been blind and complicit indeed, and we will pay a heavy price for it.
I imagine that soon enough Lucius will be able to walk down any wizarding street performing unforgivable curses right and left with no fear of punishment, Snape said, his tone ironic.
It is a bleak picture, to be sure, Severus.
Dumbledore sighed.
But you are correct. The hour is late, and my mood is subsequently dark. I originally came down here to give you something, not to wallow in grim predictions.
Oh, yes? What is it?
A possible clue to an antidote for young Master Malfoy.
Snape set down his pestle in surprise as Dumbledore reached into his pocket and drew out a roll of cloth. He laid it down on the work table in front of the potions master.
Harry Potter gave this to me. These are the broken fragments of a vial that supposedly held the antitoxin to this poison.
With a long index finger, Snape flicked at the cloth, which unrolled itself along the table and revealed bright slivers of glass clinging to the fabric like tiny glittering stars. He looked up, his dark eyes hooded. Such tiny slivers.
I know, Severus, but I recollect that during the Lestrange case, you were able to detect the stunning potion that was used on the Longbottoms from a fragment of a broken wine glass. I have hope that you will do everything that you can.
Of course I will. Snape's tone was flat. Headmaster, how much time do I have?
Lucius apparently told Draco that he had a month. From the looks of him, however, I would guess it to be a little less.
Less than a month. Inside the sleeve of his robe, Snape had balled his hand into a fist. Should I go up and talk to him then? Draco, I mean.
He is already asleep,
Dumbledore replied gently.
They all are.
A muscle twitched in Snape's cheek. Very well. Dumbledore nodded, almost absently.
Is there anything I can get for you, Severus? Anything you require for your work?
Tea, said Snape, sounding plaintive. I find myself in need of a stimulant.
I shall have the house elves bring you some lapsang soulang.
Dumbledore named the foul-smelling brew of which Snape was enamored.
And Severus, thank you for your hard work.
Even after the dungeon door closed behind the headmaster, Snape stood for a long time, lost in thought, staring down at the roll of cloth before him, starred all over with its slivers of bright greenish glass. That Harry Potter had carried these fragments all the way to Hogwarts on the slim chance that they might prove useful surprised him, and for the first time Severus Snape began to consider the possibility that Harry Potter might
not be just like his father, after all? As he considered, he very carefully began to brush the glass fragments into a small metal cauldron. The first identifiable substance on the glass turned out to be tears. It would be a long time before he found out whose tears they were. And that is all for this chapter, guys. Thank you so much for listening. Like, comment, follow, subscribe to the channel. If you're new here, hello. Welcome. I do this often. Closing notes, I suppose, a little bit before I say goodnight. So there's a couple of things that I really want folks to keep in mind as we progress this story, although I'm sure in 2026 you all have kind of twigged onto it. It was something that was not discussed back in the early 2000s, but we're going to talk about it a little bit. Ron is a victim. I want that to be extremely clear. Being coerced into anything, whether that be magical or not, and especially somebody disguising themselves and you thinking that they're somebody else, and then, you know, you trust them implicitly and you have sexual relations with them, that's rape. I want that to be very clear. Pansy Parkinson is a rapist. And I am bringing this up specifically because there's a really lovely YouTuber on here. His name is David. And he did a huge deep dive into this particular fic. And, you know, he kind of laid it out for everybody, and also did a deep dive on Cassandra Clare. Very thorough. His channel is linked down in my description box. Go check him out. He's a really cool guy. But something that he did say while he was going through this gigantic fic was that at the end of the story, in the original story, he was kind of hoping that Ron and Pansy would get together because Ron and Blaze actually ended up getting together, which I'm going to tell you all now, spoiler alert, doesn't happen with the changes that I've made to this fiction. So, bear that in mind. For a few reasons. One that David actually brought up. The first one being that he thought that it was really weird that she got together with Ron because Blaze looks like Ginny. So I took the part out because I'm just like, I mean, they don't really have any chemistry, you know, they barely spend screen time together, it doesn't make any sense, and also, you know, she does look like his sister, so that's weird. And then the other part of it is that, you know, David said Pansy and Ron, like, I thought that they would get together. It's like, it's kind of weird for Ron to get together with his rapist. Because that's exactly, you know, what it is. That would be horrible if that were to happen, you know. There's no forgiving that type of betrayal. There's no being like, oh, well, I guess if we just kind of sort it out, everything will be fine. No, that's not okay. It's not okay at all. So I just kind of wanted to tell you guys that, let you think about it, let you mull it over, and yeah, give your opinions down below if you feel like giving your opinions down below, but y'all aren't going to change my mind. But by all means, have discussions in the comments. But that's my stance on it, and I cannot be moved. So anyway, guys, thank you guys so much for listening, and yeah, I will see you all in the next one, and next month this one will come out at the more timely hour. Thank you guys. I'll see you next month. Good night.